Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. This is my palette review for December. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. Today I will be reviewing the 5 eyeshadow palettes that I tried for you in December, and that means that this is going to be like the last batch of palettes that I've tried, so you can't expect a full palette ranking for the year in the next couple of weeks for sure. If you don't know anything about this channel, when I test an eyeshadow palette, I make sure to test every single pan. I include the swatches and I include all the looks that I did. So there's loads of things here. If I look tired, if I sound hoarse and raspy, it's been quite the week. So yeah, let's just say that like life got in the way, and then work was super busy, and then my body was acting up, and there's been a whole thing. So yes. And then last night was my office Christmas party. So yay, I'm a little hungover, I think, as well. So that's where the voice comes in. So I'm perfectly fine. I'm going to be peachy if I just chill out for the next couple of days. But I needed to film this video. So if I don't look my best, you know exactly why. And I think this can be a really quick review. As you can see, it's quite a small selection of palettes here. I haven't tried as many eyeshadow palettes this year as I did in other years. I think in some years past, I was trying like upwards towards like 100 palettes a year. I stopped doing that because I was just getting too stressed out and there was no more space to use the palettes I love and that are also in my collection, especially because I want to try every single pan. My selection usually is like 4 to 5 palettes a month. Sometimes those palettes are bigger and they include more pans like the Simply Posh here in the back, or it's little things like this as well. So let me chat to you about these eyeshadow palettes so that we have an idea. Oh, and do you know what these are? It's a Cezanne little trio that I picked up on my Japan trip. Narimi Beauty Ashes palette, the Unearthly Cosmetics Shadow Sculpt Ghoul Garden, the Odin's Eye Spring Dragon, and Simply Posh Gingerbread Bakery. So let's start with the little guy first. This is by Cezanne. It's written right here at the front. I don't know what this is called because everything is in Japanese, but it's called the Tone Up eyeshadow in shade 11. I picked this up from Sames, which is their like drugstore sort of situation, and I really wanted to try some Japanese makeup after being in Japan this summer. So I knew I was going to pick up a lot of things, and a lot of the makeup that you see around that you can pick up from stores is like this really sort of easy, like it feels very cheap. But this was really beautiful eyeshadow, I have to say. So I was very surprised with this because with how cheap the packaging feels and the way this looks, like this reminds me of a little Rimmel palette I used to have like way back in the day when I first started doing my makeup, and that was just something I wasn't super impressed with. But these are really pretty. They are very soft eyeshadows. This is not going to give you a very impactful look. It's not meant to give you that. That's never the intention, I feel, with these like Japanese companies. Like if you look at the full display, you can just see that the focus is more so on skin, and then the color cosmetics are just there to enhance certain things, to perhaps add a touch of shimmer, but not like Western makeup where they really try to like change your entire appearance. I feel like they're trying to like accentuate what's already there, even though I do know within like a lot of Asian beauty standards, like contouring and like changing your lids and stuff is a whole thing as well, but not by using makeup, I feel. So this is just a really pretty little easy to use palette. It gives a very beautiful, great for like going to work sort of look. If you're really into minimal makeup, this is something that you might really enjoy. Is this the best eyeshadow quality of my life? No. These are more satin leaning shades, so that has to be your preference in order for you to like this. And I don't mind a satin shimmer. I like them quite well from time to time. But this was a satin shimmer where I really felt it was a type of satin shimmer that I really hadn't tried before. I sometimes feel that satin shimmers can look a little bit dusty on the lids. It doesn't look very impactful. But these looked very sort of smoothing on the lids almost. It was like I had airbrushed my lids after using this eyeshadow. So it definitely delivered. It's just a very basic, boring B sort of palette, you could say. but I did really enjoy using this. It was a lot more successful than I had expected. Compared to everything else I've tried, this is of course going to disappear against some of the indie makeup I've tried this year, and even like some other things that I tried this year. This really doesn't hold a candle. But I do feel that very often what you see in the makeup space, like if it's not exactly like what people love, they're going to hate on things. And I'm like, I try to look at this for what it is, and it's just 3 very basic eyeshadows with a bit of a subtle satin shimmer, and it does that really, really well. And then I'm like, you know what, this is cute. It's a nice little commemoration of my trip to Japan. So this is probably gonna go into a makeup memory box rather than me decluttering it and getting out of my life, because it does sort of like take me back. And that's one of the joys of being able to travel and shop for little things like this, because it really sort of is this throwback moment to like me walking around. Like I think it was in Asakusa where I picked this up, and I had a great day that day, and it was just lovely because I went to the Sky Tree that day, and I did the little like shopping street there, and this was just a lovely, lovely day and a lovely time that I had in Japan. So that, it definitely, like the nostalgia is there too, right? So it doesn't influence how good the makeup is, but I do think that if you just take it for what it is, it's a really good palette in that respect. But of course, compared to like indie shadows or something like Natasha Denona, it doesn't really like compare. I do realize that. But for what it is, I think it's really pretty. Then I'll do this one next. This is something that Esther gifted to me. So this is by Odin's Eye. It's the Spring Dragon palette, which is a collab they did with Judy. And this palette is part of the legendary Diversa collection, I believe. That was a collab that they did twice with 3 creators, and each creator got to like create their own palette. I know that Annette from Annette's Makeup Corner was one of the other creators, and I think Tina from the Fancy Face was one of the creators as well. And they did 2 different collabs with them, and I believe this is the Judy palette from the second time they did the collab. And it's essentially a very sort of pastel-y eyeshadow palette, right? So that's probably why Esther gifted it to me. I don't think Esther is really into like the pastels and stuff. She's really into her warm tones. She loves a warm tone green. It's why she also gifted me the Mountain Trail by Sydney Grace, because that's her favorite palette. And she was like, they're going to discontinue it, and I feel bad that you've never got to try it, so here it is. I was like, okay. But in that same package, she included this. And I have to say that this palette, I'm really glad that I got to try it, even though this is not something I would have ever picked up myself, because I have refound a appreciation for Odin's Eye eyeshadow. I have had a couple of bad experiences with Odin's Eye palettes, some of the Christmas releases that they did, and then a couple of their later releases. Like, I kept trying things to see if it was a pattern or if it just was a fluke. And after trying like 2 or 3 palettes where it was like a similar thing where the shimmers just didn't pick up, they didn't perform as well, even though a lot of people were raving about it. And I do have to say that Odin's Eye does some really lovely color stories, so I'm always like looking at them and get sucked in by them. But because I knew the quality wasn't always there, I felt a little bit like bad about recommending it to you, because if they happen to have loads of bad batches and it happens to me, it might also happen to you, and then you spend your hard-earned cash on it. And then at the same time, I felt bad because then I would have to spend money on a palette that I ended up never using again, because as pretty as they are, like if the quality isn't what I want, then of course I'm never going to use it again. But this palette proved me wrong, because when I got this in, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like this much. It's just not my color story. It's sort of these like springtime colors, you could say. I think that if you're a spring in color analysis, that this is going to be your color palette. So this isn't really for me. I kind of like the look of like the purpley tones and the minty green. That's what I sort of felt like most comfortable with, and like these like slightly neutrally shades here. And then the light blue I kind of like the look of. But there's like yellow and like corals and peachy tones in here, which I know are a bit of a clash with my skin tone. So I was a bit nervous for this one. But what I found out in usage is that a lot of the shimmers in here have a bit of a silver sparkle to them, making them a little bit more cool toned than they look in the pan. So that was one thing that I liked about it. And for pastels, like pastels can go many different ways, and very often they can be a little bit dusty and they can look a little bit chalky, because essentially what pastels are very muted down colors that have a lot of white in them. And because of the sheer amount of white pigment that a pastel needs for it to be a pastel, a lot of the times it can just look a little dusty, ashy, chalky. It's just not a good look. But I didn't have that with these. Of course, I do have a fair skin tone, so that often makes these very light colors like look pretty good on me anyways, just because I'm super fair, and it's not like it doesn't clash with my skin tone, this like white base that these shadows have. So it ended up being so much more successful than I had expected. And what really surprised me was the shimmer quality. I was able to pick these up with a brush. They blended, they went on with a finger to intensify them and to make them look more sparkly, especially this purple shimmer. I do appreciate that now. Is this palette going to survive declutters? Not really. It's not like my new favorite pastel eyeshadow palette or anything like that, but I'm glad that I was able to try this again and to try this brand again to see that, yes, I do think that sometimes there are just batches that don't perform as well as the next one, and that if you get a good batch, it's really, really good eyeshadow. So now that I'm like, in 2026, I may have to have a look at what Odin's Eye does next, and if there is a color story that they do that really appeals to me, I may have to try them again, just to give them another fair shot to see if I'm right about this. But yeah, it had some really lovely things in. The looks I did with this were really pretty. They were very soft and sort of like ethereal looking. It had a whimsical vibe to it, which for December, when it's like really dark and dreary, this was sort of like that little hit of dopamine I needed to have this pick me up, and especially because December is always so crazy busy for us, hence the voice, hence the tiredness. This worked really well for that, so I do appreciate it for that reason. And last but not least, the 3 eyeshadow palettes that I picked up when MONOLITH did their new drop in November, which also coincided with their Black Friday sale. So I picked these 2 up in the sale, and this was a newer release. I am affiliated with MONOLITH, so they either send me palettes or they give me store credit to use and make these kind of purchases. So I'm really appreciative of them doing that. If you want to get 5% off of your next MONOLITH order, then you can use my code, which is always in the description box, but I also put it on the screen whenever I do mention it. So that's how I got my hands on these palettes. I didn't pay for these with my own money. And that's why there is also the Simply Posh Gingerbread Bakery, because one of the things that MONOLITH does want you to do is to pick up one of their new things and not spend it on things that have already been on the website for a while. That's one of the like deals that we have with them. But I did try 2 new to me brands, because both Narimi Beauty, which is right here at the front, and Simply Posh were 2 brands I had never tried before, but that I had been eyeing up from a distance. But none of the color stories they had released so far felt like it was something that was right for me, or that was something that was truly something different compared to other things that I have in my makeup collection, especially for like Simply Posh. I know their Cozy Cabin is super popular, and I think they also do an Aurora Lights inspired palette. Those look really pretty, but it looks like every other palette of that sort of color story. And the Gingerbread Bakery, as you will see in a second, is a little bit more unique, like compared to other things I have in my collection. So that's why I selected those 3, and I wanted to try Unearthly again. Unearthly is a little bit similar to me as with Odin's Eye, where I've tried some palettes by them that I've loved and excellent formula, but then a couple of years ago they started changing their formula. It became much harder pressed. For instance, the Dreamer palette, I love the color story, but the actual performance of the shadows, and then especially the shimmers, with it like being able to pick it up with a brush, blending it, being able to intensify it in different layers, I felt it didn't perform very well that way. So I was curious to try the Ghoul Garden, because that is the palette they released this summer that I've heard a lot of people on Instagram saying is their old formula. So that's why I wanted to try those 2 new to me brands, and another palette by a brand that I just wanted to give another shot. So here's those 3, and the first thing I tried was this beautiful Narimi Beauty palette. Look at this. It's so stunning. I love it. And what I like most about it, can I do this without like breaking things? Is that the design is also on the back of the cover. That's an attention to detail that I love. Narimi Beauty is a Chinese beauty brand that is stocked on MONOLITH, but I think it's also stocked in places like C Beauty Mall and like other websites that sell a lot of Chinese makeup. I do know that MONOLITH also stocks a couple of other Chinese beauty brands, and I can't wait to try more because I think that Chinese beauty brands, like I started to dip my toes into Cheer Yep at the end of 2024, and this year is really the year where I was just like, okay, Chinese makeup brands is where it's at if you want indie shadow quality, but you don't want to pay indie shadow prices. There are a couple of brands within the Chinese makeup realm that go for a similar price point, or sometimes even more compared to like some Western indie brands, but since these indie brands also manufacture a lot of their palettes in like Chinese factories, there's nothing wrong with that. But I do feel like buying directly from a Chinese brand is sort of like cutting out the middleman. And they do interesting color stories. Like I'm really on the gothic baddie sort of ghoul dark Victorian gothic inspired side of TikTok all of a sudden. And I'm here for it. So I'm following this creator called Freya, who's done a couple of collabs with Cheer Yep and some other brands. Renia is popping up onto my feed all the time, and she does some really stunning things. And then, of course, there's Bronte Marie, who's sort of like taking these Chinese beauty brands, like trends, and is translating them for a Western audience. I believe she's an Australian creator. And then there's Ghoul in Japan, who I also love. So, and I actually may have bought her collab with Shall We Makeup because I just think it's stunning looking and something different. So I'm really thinking like based on what I'm seeing on TikTok and what I'm like the buzz on there is that 2026 is going to be the year that eyeshadow palettes are coming back. And that would make my heart very happy. Clean girl makeup is out. Eyeshadow palettes are back, and it makes me really happy. So I'm glad I got to try Narimi Beauty before it totally blows up. This in the sale was like 25 euros or something. I believe full price it was like 35 to 40. But this is insane. I thought it wasn't going to be good quality because it looks a little bit basic. It's the Ashes palette. It's their cool tone palette. They do some more interesting color stories, but I knew that this color palette would be within my comfort zone, and I knew I would get more use out of it just because I like these colors a lot. But even though it's sort of like because of the purple background, I feel you can't really see what these shades are. And the reason for it is just because the purple kind of makes them skew in a slightly different way. There's only 2 shimmers in here, which, you know, I don't love, but they are really good shimmers. And there are different undertones here. You get blues, grays, but these grays have a slight green undertone. You do get cool tone browns, but then this has a bit of a purpley undertone. It's so, so beautiful, and I think it's a very well done palette. The mattes are insanely pigmented, but still blendable, super easy to use. And the 2 shimmers is where it shines. Those are like the best thing about this palette, even though there's only 2. You get this thing that looks like a charcoal gray, and then you get another thing that just looks like a silver. This has flecks of green in, and this has flecks of blue in, so they are a lot more interesting than you might have expected. This side of the palette I did a look with creates the perfect smoky eye, and this is like the best neutral eye of my life. It's really pretty. I was worried as I was swatching these that this like really sparkly layer that you see in them might have been an overspray, but I have found that even if you continue to use them, I don't know why they become darker, but in usage on the lids, it doesn't affect the usage of the eyeshadow. The eyeshadow still goes on as sparkly as when you first swatch them, because I was just afraid that it just had a sparkly layer and then there's a matte underneath. Who remembers that era of makeup where everything was an overspray? I remember that, was it a Shiseido blush? I think it was by Shiseido, and it had this really, it was their orchid blush. Do they still do that? Anybody know? And it had this beautiful sort of like gold design in the middle when you bought it, but then after a couple of uses, the gold layer was gone, and you just ended up with a peachy blush. What's up with that? And eyeshadows used to be like that too. So I was worried with this that it was going to be the same, but it's not. And I have to say, like, I've been wearing so many cool tones in the past couple of weeks again, and I'm feeling so good wearing them. It's completely confirmed to me why I love cool tones so much. Because I'm testing out eyeshadow palettes left, right, and center all the time, I'm not always, like, wearing those things. But when I wear them, I'm like, oh, my heart. It just makes my heart flutter. It makes my heart happy to be wearing cool tones. And if they're this good, this truly packs a punch, and I really like it, and I love that they are doing these interesting designs. Other than that, it's just a super easy, simple palette. So it's not like mind-blowing in terms of color story, but it's really good shadow. Next up is the Ghoul Garden by Unearthly Cosmetics, and I can already tell you right off the bat that this was so much more successful than some of the other Unearthly palettes that I've tried in the past, similar to my experience with the Odin's Eye. I wouldn't call this the same quality, though, as their older palettes, but I can tell why people would think that, because I especially feel that the mattes feel, I wouldn't say less pigmented, but easier to blend and easier to pick up than what I've tried in like the Dreamer and stuff. Their Gothic Romance that I got to try because MONOLITH sent it to me in PR this fall, I also did really enjoy in terms of like usage and how the looks came together. But the shimmers in here are absolutely stunning. This is such a beautiful eyeshadow palette, and I'm really, like, I never got to try the Flower Punk by Kaleidos, but someone in the comments when I first showed this in my haul at the start of the month was like, that looks like a Flower Punk. And I'm like, yeah, you may be onto something, but I never got the Flower Punk because there were a couple of shades in there that were too similar to other things I already owned by them. But by now, I have decluttered most of those things already owned by Kaleidos. So now this, to me, makes perfect sense. Do I have plenty of grungy green eyeshadow palettes, though? Yes, I do. I may have to stop buying grungy green eyeshadow palettes. But this is really beautiful. It gives you every rendition of a green that you might want. And I ended up doing 2 looks, one with this side of the palette, one with this side of the palette. And they still did come together for me. Sometimes when greens have different undertones, they do not blend together really well, and it looks a little weird and murky because the undertones don't really mix. But I didn't have any issues with the greens in this. This sort of like turquoisey thing, this was completely inspired by, I think it was Ghoul in Japan or Rinia, who did this like lighter colored turquoisey matte in the inner corner and then topping shimmer over it. I'm like, oh, this is the best use of a pastel I've seen in my life. So I tried to do that when I did the look with this palette. I tried to sort of like emulate what I've seen these creators doing with this palette, and I think it looked really stunning. There are a couple of things though that do shift a little bit more warm toned, which is like the only thing I would say is a downside here. And the shimmers in here are really emollient and very flaky and shimmery. So if you have if you have very oily lids, or if you struggle a lot with eyeshadow creasing on you, this may not be the best palette. I make it work because I have a whole thing where I prime my lids in a certain way, so I hardly ever experience my eyeshadow creasing for that reason, even if they are super emollient like this. And no, I do not use a glitter glue. I do not. I just make sure my eyeshadow primer has time to marinate, as I like to call it. So the way makeup works very often, it's a bit like cooking, where if you put a cold stick of butter in a cold pan, of course it's not going to melt. You need to wait for the pan to heat up, put the butter in, then the butter needs to go bubbly, and then you can start like putting the ingredients to the pan. Because else it will not cook, else things will not brown, because the butter hasn't had time to like release its oils and do its sort of thing. And makeup works in the same way, that sometimes you need to let things like set for it to actually do its job. And I feel with eyeshadow primer and also face primer, really, it works like that. So if you struggle with eyeshadows creasing on you, put your eyeshadow primer on at the start of your makeup routine, and then by the time you get to your shadow, there's been like a good 5 minutes in between, and you will feel it's tackier than when it first gets on, like goes onto the lid. So if you're someone who struggles with eyeshadow creasing, think about how you apply your primer, and maybe you can make it work longer. You do not need a glitter glue to make shadow stick, if you need a glitter glue to make shadow stick, you need to reevaluate your application skills. I'm very sorry. That may be a hard message for some people, but I do feel that these work really well. I love the color story. I love the way these shades came together. This is more intense. Like, compared to everything else I've shown you so far, this is the most out there palette that I have for you this month, but I loved it. I loved every single look I did with this. It was punchy, it was in your face, it had great pigmentation, yet still had the blendability. This is the Unearthly cosmetics that I want. So, also 2026, there is another like interesting Unearthly release. I may want to pick that up. Next up is the Simply Posh Gingerbread Bakery palette. And when I first showed this in my haul, I had a commenter saying like, hey, why are you making this your first palette by the brand? I don't think this is going to showcase to you what this brand can do, because there are quite a few negative reviews on this palette because the pastels aren't very good. At least that's how I interpret it. Maybe I'm interpreting wrong, but still. But this palette is essentially 50% browns. If a brand cannot do a brown eyeshadow very well, that's when I become worried about them. Because brown eyeshadow is like the standard. That's what every brand can do or should be able to do really well. Pastels, that's on another level. Those are difficult to get right. But I have to say that I thought this was really pretty. This is not my favorite eyeshadow formula though, and mainly because it's far too powdery for my liking. But that's about it. These blend it really well. There's enough light shades for it to work for me. It's not super deep. So maybe if you have medium to deep skin, you may not like this, simply because just the way the colors are laid out, it may just be a little bit too light for a lot of people. But me, with my fair skin, felt like $1,000,000 every single time I did this, like I used this palette. And I did 3 looks. I did these looks during this crazy busy week that I've had this past week, and I had no issues. I didn't have to rush to get to work, because these practically applied themselves. So in terms of application and the way the looks came together, I was really happy with it. It looked really pretty. I have no qualms with that. What I didn't love is how powdery these are. I was like, wow, these eyeshadows are disintegrating right in front of my eyes. So that has me a little worried, because that probably means there isn't a lot of binding agent in these, and binding agents are needed to keep the pigments together, and they tend to expire really quickly. So if your eyeshadow expires, powder shadows I'm talking about here, the thing that expires is not the pigment, it's the binding agents that keep them together. That's the thing that expires quicker. So I'm actually a little bit worried for how much longevity this has. Not in terms of like wear time on the eyes, that was totally fine, but how long this is gonna go for until it goes bad, because of the fact that there seems to be very little binding agents in there. That's just the experience I had with using this. Also, if you are a contact lens where these are super sparkly, and because of the lack of like stickiness that they sometimes have, I did experience some like shimmers falling down my face. Like, the eyeshadow didn't crease, and the eyeshadow like didn't like look like it was like very worn in or anything like that. Some shadows can do that, but it was like there were little sparkles just falling off my lids throughout the day, where one day, the final look I did with this, I was like going this with my mascara the entire time, because every single time there was like something in my vision, and it was one of the little sparkles that had fallen down. So if you're a contact lens wearer, you may want to think twice about wearing this eyeshadow palette, because it could lead to issues, because if little particles get behind your contact lenses, it's not a good thing. But overall, I really like the looks that I created with this. I wore one of these looks on a full work day, went to a dance class at the end of the day, and by the time I took a shower, like more than 15 hours later, it was still on my face. So it was totally fine. What I ended up doing is 3 looks where I combined the first row of the 9 pans that I see in this. Because that just makes sense. I don't think you're gonna love this palette if you try putting too many of these pastels together. Because I agree, The pastels do have to be used in a very targeted way for this to look nice. Because because of the dustiness of the palette, I do feel it can look a little chalky for that reason. But if you use the browns together with the pastels, no issues. That's what I ended up doing. The shimmers went together really well. It came together really well. But the way this is laid out, and I think it's because of the gold background here, it looks like you get a cool tone row, a warm tone row, and a neutral row of browns. You don't. These are all yellows. They all have a yellow undertone, and you don't see that in the pan because of the yellow gold background that this has. So it looks more interesting in the brown section than it actually is. You get 9 warm tone browns and 9 pastels. Do they work together really well? Is that a downside? No, but if you were hoping to get a mix of neutrals in this palette, know that it just looks like it, and it isn't actually there. But yeah, this was a lot more successful than I had expected based on some of the comments I saw on my other video, and also based on what I've seen, like the buzz around this palette. I had seen some people being a little bit more disappointed with this one. So if your question to me is Simply Posh Cosmetics now your favorite like thinner formula, because that's what this is, it has a pretty thin formula, I would say no. If you're looking for an indie brand with a thinner formula that's not like super in your face like the Unearthly is, then I would recommend going for Nomad instead. I feel that they have a similar price point and they have a thinner formula that's super easy to work with, especially if you're a beginner, but that doesn't have the powderiness or the kick up that this has, I feel. So that's why I feel like this formula isn't that special to me. I know a lot of people rate this really highly, but I looked up the price of this, and if I had to pay for this with my own money, it would cost me like 60 euros. And do I feel this palette is worth 60 euros? I know there's 18 pans of eyeshadow in here. Yeah, 18. But I would say no. Like if this were around the 40-45 euro mark, I would just understand it a little bit better, especially because we're only getting 1 row of shimmers. There's 2 rows of mattes, 1 row of shimmers. Then I would have felt the price point would have been warranted. So I do feel this is a little bit pricey for the kind of formula that you're getting. I mean, for this price point, I feel you can just find better eyeshadow. So this was cool. It's different from anything else I've tried so far. I'm glad I got to try the brand. There are a couple of pros and cons with this, but yeah, I did enjoy the looks that I created. And if you don't mind the cons that I've described, then you may really love this as well. So those are the 5 eyeshadow palettes that I tested out for you in December 2025. Check back really, really soon. I still have a couple of videos to do before the end of the year, of course, because I'm doing my end of year favorites. I'm not going to do as many episodes as I've done in the past because I simply tried less makeup. So there is less for me to chat about. So I'm going to do 4 videos, and I think the first one is going to go up Christmas Day, and then the Saturday and the Sunday after Christmas, and then on the Tuesday before New Year's. So, and then I think my first video of the new year is going to be my palette ranking. So those are the things I still have in store for you coming very, very soon. Of course, I do have this channel where I post 4 times a week about makeup, but if you want more and you want other content from me, such as book videos or fashion content, that's actually on my second channel, which is called Floating in Books. That one is always linked in the description box down below. And if you want to follow my coloring journey, because in 2025 I got a new hobby, that's on TikTok. So that's Floating in Dreams _. So if you find me there, that's where you can find my coloring journey and sort of see all the pages that I color and sort of how that's going. So you can find me anywhere. I also have a blog where I post some makeup reviews from time to time as well. But that's sort of where I combine all of the content. So that's like your nice little hub. So you can follow that. If you just want like a daily update whenever I post a new post, you get an email if you sign up to the website there. There's that. And if you just want to see like vacation photos and like things I do in my regular life, I sometimes post on Instagram, but I mainly use my Instagram to look for makeup news. So I don't really post on there very much. But all of those links are in the description box down below. So I hope to see you in one of those spaces, or check back here and see when there's a new video up. And then I hope to see you again really, really soon. Bye-bye.